Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor, and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
G'day, DJ Payne here, and welcome to episode 22 of Thrive Deeper. This is a bonus extra podcast as we wrap up the edition of the Daily Reader Thrive Deeper, the green, tealy, aqua, whatever you want to call it, edition that has been with us since August, September and October. We're going to be talking about Titus and Philemon, and as we head into the brand new red edition of November, December and January, and into the book of Ezra, we're going to be giving a bit of an introduction on that. Also have some special stuff for you that I'll tell you at the end of the discussion. But after the break, Matthew and I will be getting into these final letters from Paul to Titus and Philemon on Thrive Deeper. All right, we're back with a bonus podcast. Matt, I don't even ask you anymore about approving these bonus podcasts. I just say time to come and record.
This is a bonus, is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
There was a bonus last week. We put out 2 episodes last week.
So I'm being generous, and I don't even really know that I'm being generous. I just rocked up, really.
That's it. You've so discombobulated with all of the travelling that you've done and everything that you've got on. I'm taking advantage of that and saying, yeah, it's time to record again.
I never liked the word bonus.
Yeah, so we need to come up with another word for bonus. It's just an extra. It's just a double down. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason why we're doing this extra podcast at the moment is because we finished up 1st and 2nd Timothy.
Yeah.
And then in wrapping up this edition of the Thrive Daily Reading Guide, this beautiful teal green edition for August, September, October 2018, there are 2 books we've left out.
Yeah.
So we thought we've got to come in here and pay respect to Titus and Philemon.
That's right. You could almost miss Philemon, but it's a really important book.
Yes. Yeah.
As we will make clear.
And so is Titus. So
yeah, that's right, yeah.
So is Titus. So I thought, let's come and do one more because we're about to move into the brand new edition of Thrive. And this is the edition for November, taking us all the way to January, the Fire Engine Red Edition, and we're going back to the Old Testament.
That's right. So the rhythm of the Thrive Bible Reading Guide is generally 2 Old Testament editions to 1 New Testament edition. So that's so we go back to some amazing books, actually, Book of Ezra, as well as some of the Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, as well as Haggai, Zechariah, some of the prophets, Malachi, the prophets from that time as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, how about this? How about we get stuck into the wrapping up and saying goodbye to the writings of Paul for a while with Titus and Philemon. We'll take a break and then we'll come back and we'll give everybody a bit of an overview and intro to the book of Ezra. Yeah. All right. So the book of Titus, sometimes forgotten over there, loosely, going over there. People like, it covers a lot of the same stuff as Timothy and 2 Timothy there, sort of instructions to a pastor, doing his thing. But there's a little bit more. There's something about Titus that I really dig.
Yeah, it is. It belongs as one of the pastoral epistles, as they're known. So like Timothy, Titus is a young leader. He travelled with Paul. Paul planted churches in Crete, but then he moves on and he leaves Titus in Crete to oversee these churches. And Paul hasn't really even had time to appoint elders or really. It's really new work here in Crete. And so he's giving instructions in this letter to Titus to do that. Now, it's interesting that these letters, these pastoral epistles, that they are not just personal letters, and this includes Philemon actually, which you would very much think was just a personal letter to one person. Why do we still have it today?
Yeah.
Well, they're very consciously written actually to be publicly used. So Paul was writing these letters. So it's not like he wrote letters and they just got picked up. You know, they were intended initially as just personal letters, and then later on they've been picked up and made into something more. Yeah. As some often letters, you know, collections of letters often happens. But in Paul's case, he's conscious of the fact that he's writing these letters and they're going to be more publicly used, and that's the case with Titus. So it's instructions for Titus around the establishment of this church. And of course, in those instructions are very important instructions, a really important blueprint for the church.
Yeah.
So that's
with a
of which we are part, of which all of us are part. So it's not just something that concerns Titus as the leader of that church. It's something that really concerns us all as part of the church.
Okay, so a little bit about Titus. He's a Gentile. He's Greek.
That's right, but he actually, unlike Timothy, because of some work among the Jews, Paul had Timothy circumcised, poor old Timothy, and then, but not the same with Titus. In Titus's case, really to make a statement, I guess, that Titus was not to go through that Jewish rite.
Now, why did he make that statement? And why did poor old Timothy have to go through that
yeah, that's
ordeal?
Right. Well, different circumstances. I mean, Paul, in those early stages, Paul just didn't want that argument with the Jews at that stage. But at the slightly later stage, so much of Paul's message has been, you don't need to go through this Jewish ceremony. The gospel now opens it up to all nations, and this isn't necessary, the rite of circumcision. So that is withheld from Titus as a symbol of of the fact that it's an unnecessary thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, so that's the man Titus. Yeah. Another sort of student or disciple or apprentice Padawan, to the mighty Paul. Yeah. Paul sent him off to the island of Crete.
Yeah.
Now the island of Crete in this age is infamous for a few different things.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that he quotes from a Cretan philosopher in chapter 1, verse verse 12. He says, one of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons." And then you expect him to say, that's a bit mean. He goes on and says, this testimony is true. Paul must have had a hard time in Crete, but it's not. It's not about that. And he's not just. It sounds a bit harsh, like he's generalising. But this is actually, he's experienced this with these sort of group of people, and so he's warning Titus there to pull them into shape, really. We need to pull these people into shape.
I don't think it's so applicable, even though we are not, we are not Titus. We are not young. Most people listening right now are not young pastors living on this, living on an island. But we are believers, and a lot of us sometimes, especially in the cultures that we live in, can feel like, oh my goodness, I'm surrounded by Cretans.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are just not interested in what I believe in.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. We even have the saying cretins. He's a cretin. I mean, that survived through to the present.
2,000 years later.
2,000 years later, we still have that expression. It comes from this. But yeah, it was a bit of an outpost. It was it was a hard place. Entrenched in paganism, they had their work cut out for them here. But the gospel is exerting this transforming influence on this culture, and Paul is instructing Titus to let that carry right through. Make sure it impacts every part of their life, which is an important element about the early message. It isn't just that they weren't going out there saying, believe in Jesus so you can go to heaven when you die. They are seeing that the gospel, the good news, is the good news about the kingdom of God, that Jesus is Lord. And this is meant to fundamentally change the lives of people, and as well as they see it as changing the cities that they're ministering in. So I think, again, and we'll see this as well very much with Philemon, that there's this ripple effect that this is meant to have, and Paul wants Titus to make sure that carries through.
Now, something that I've always loved about the book of Titus, and it's so easy to read. It's just 3 little chapters, little chapters from Paul to this young pastor over there, really doing his best. Look, we live in, depending on what culture or background or belief type of set you come from, especially in different churches. A dirty word amongst some Christians can be the word doctrine.
Yeah.
They hear the word doctrine and they go, oh, brother, doctrine divides, but love encompasses. It's all about love.
Yeah.
And, and that can be true for some people, there can be that. And yes, doctrine can get abused and people can use different teachings in different way. But I love the book of Titus because Paul makes the whole point that good doctrine in a good order really applied to your life, and especially as this young preacher, he just has to keep on giving them good doctrine, the right teaching, and it'll change their lives.
Yeah, that's right.
Not only change their lives, but then have an effect
that's right.
to the community, to the Cretans around them. It's going to have an effect there, and it all comes from this seed of good doctrine.
Yeah, so he says in the beginning of chapter 2, as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. This isn't, it's at this stage, it's not necessarily the kind of abstract teaching that we know as church doctrine. It's actually much more practical, because he goes on, older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled. It's very much about how they are to live, because there were people, and the concern here is that of false teachers coming in saying, no, you need to do this and do that, you need to stop doing this and stop doing that, and coming in with all of the rules. And there's a classic statement in this letter where Paul says, to the pure, all things are pure, but to the impure, all things are impure. Yeah. I think there's a genius in that statement, because these false teachers are wanting to say, don't touch this, don't do that, don't. And Paul is saying, listen, he's coming in with this message that essentially brings a new kind of worldview. Jesus is Lord, right? Which means that everything is being redeemed, which means that those things that you once thought were unclean or impure, like, we actually purify those things. They don't make us impure. We purify those things. Yeah. And we know that to be the case with, different foods and different rules around those sorts of things, or even things like marriage, sexuality, things that these sorts of teachers were saying, oh, that's all evil, all of that stuff. Yeah. Paul's saying, no, to the pure, we purify these things. We redeem these things, so that they can be what they're meant to be. Yeah. So the doctrine here, and it certainly does carry elements of belief, beliefs about who Jesus is, and that actually is a very important aspect of that. So it's not discounting that, but it's ultimately with a view to preserving the power and the simplicity of the message, so it doesn't get overlaid with all different complexities. It doesn't become about, and again in this letter, Paul warns Timothy about getting caught up in endless controversies. Arguments end of Titus. Sorry, at the end of Titus, like in Timothy. Yeah, exactly. Don't get caught up in these endless abstract controversies.
Genealogies.
Genealogies, and just don't get caught up in all of that. Stick to the central message. Preserve the central message. Make sure you always teach.
And again, that central message being the incarnation of Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
This is Christ. This is what He's done for us. This changes everything.
That's right. And it's the message about the kingdom. It's the message about what God has done, and what God is doing, and what God is going to do. So it's really, I think that's a great way of looking at what the message that He's trying to preserve, that it's a message about something that God has done, that He did not only starting from Abraham right through all the events in the Old Testament, but all of that culminated, of course, in Christ. So what God has done in Christ and everything that led up to that, what He is doing, He is establishing His kingdom, and then what he is going to do, and that, of course, is the return of Christ and the ushering in of a new heavens and new earth, as well as the judgment and so forth. So there are these elements that he wanted them to keep in mind and focus on that, because that has enormous practical import for our lives today.
Yeah, totally. I think a great summary, I mean, I had someone the other day say to me, what exactly is the gospel? Someone who's been a Christian for a long time. Yeah. And I'd just been reading Titus. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? 3 chapters of what the gospel is today in our life summed up perfectly in the book of Titus, because Paul just has those great quotes. There's great memory verses in Titus, about how we look forward to his, to his coming, and how we are to live, in the day to day. It's great. I love the book of Titus.
That's right. I would, the way I would sum it up is that the gospel, I think that's a very good question, actually. I mean, the gospel is that God has come to us in Jesus Christ, and through his death has reconciled us to himself. So that we can bring this message of reconciliation out to the world. And it's important that the worldwide scope is part of the message. It's like that God has come to us in Jesus Christ, that he has won the world through his death. He's won the world to us. So he is Lord. So it's something, it is a message about that focuses on Christ, what Christ has done, who Christ is, and what he's doing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Great summary. And again, in the last bit, in chapter 3, that final chapter in Titus, he goes through and he has the big hitters like verse 5, not by works of righteousness, which we have done, but according to his mercy, he saved us, and he just lays it out, then it's because of he saved us through the washing of the regeneration of the Spirit, going on, laying it out there. So clear.
Yeah. And I think it's important that part of the good news, and this is an important aspect, is that because of what Christ has done and is doing, our lives can be changed. That's important. It's not just I get my ticket to heaven. Yeah. The good news is that God is taking charge of things and making things the way that he wants them to be. Yeah. Because remember, they referred to it as the gospel of the kingdom. Yeah. And Jesus announced that and said the kingdom of God is at hand. Yeah. So it's very much a message of transformation that God is changing the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. That double impact that Paul does so well. Here's the big high thought, and it impacts like this day to day. All right, now moving on to a massive impact, especially for the culture of the time, is the next book written around the same time. These are all written around 66, the same time around First Timothy is written.
Yeah, that's right.
Like a batch of letters from that first imprisonment there from Paul. We have the book of Philemon. Yeah, and this also goes now. The book of Philemon, very very briefly, is like part 2 or like a joined letter with the book of Colossians.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So it flows on well from what we just said, because we've just said that that this good news is that because of what Christ has done and is doing, it changes things. It changes our lives. Now, it's absolutely revolutionary. This is it fundamentally changes how we actually relate to each other, how we do life. It changes all of the paradigms, the worldly paradigms. It flips those on their head. This is the Lordship of Christ. This is what this does. And nowhere do we see this more polarized than in an issue like slavery. Now, the letter to Philemon, and it is a letter. It's a short letter, unlike the other ones.
25 verses long.
Yeah, that's right.
430 words. Yeah, not even.
So it's like the shortest.
One chapter. It's not
that's
even.
Right. So it's the shortest document included in the New Testament. So it's a letter to Philemon, who is an earlier convert of Paul, probably from his Ephesian time in Ephesus. Lives in Colossae. He had this slave called Onesimus, and Onesimus ran away and somehow came under the ministry of Paul, came to faith under Paul, became a believer, and works with Paul. And Paul's eager then to send him back, feels that this is important, that he go back to Philemon. And so he sends him back, probably with Tychicus. If we go back to Colossians, Tychicus was going to carry these letters back to Colossae, and one of that would have been this letter. And Philemon Onesimus was to go as well.
Yeah, and he mentions him at the end of Colossians here, in the last chapter of Colossians.
Yeah.
He says, all my affairs will be made known to you by Tychicus, the beloved brother, faithful servant, and fellow bondservant in the Lord. I'm sending him to you for this very purpose, that he may know your circumstances and comfort your hearts, and together with Onesimus, the faithful and beloved brother who is one of you, they will make known to you everything that is going on here. And it's like, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, so that's a good introduction. So now the key thing here is that he's a slave, right?
Yes.
Now, slaves were not seen as even treated like real people.
Yeah.
I mean, they were, they had no rights. They were at the lowest of the low. So you notice there, he warms the congregation up by saying, "I'm sending Onesimus, who is a brother."
Yes.
And he's one of you.
Yeah.
Now, already that's completely revolutionary, because at no point is there this sense that slaves are the equals of everyone else.
Yeah.
And this is what I think is revolutionary about this letter. And it's easy to miss this, because you think, oh, this is a strange letter in the midst. Like, what's the big deal here? But N.T. Wright says an interesting thing about this in his massive work on Paul, published a few years ago. He begins with the letter to Philemon. N.T. Wright begins this massive work and he says that if all that we had was this letter to Philemon, it would raise massive questions. If all that we didn't have any other part of the New Testament, and this just came out to us from ancient history, we would be thinking, what is this movement? There is nothing like it is. There's nothing like it. It's completely countercultural, because he's saying that that Onesimus is to be received as a brother, part of the community, that he's an equal sharer in the equal heir, really, of Christ. And this is, I think, the power of the gospel. Paul often talks about the power of the gospel, in that it transforms things really from the inside out. Take an issue like slavery. Slavery is so indicative, really, of the human condition. We rebel against God in the name of autonomy. I'm going to rule my own life. That's autonomy, right? Now, if I want to rule my own life and be autonomous, naturally my autonomy is going to come in conflict with your autonomy, right? So that's going to put people in conflict with people, and someone loses, right? Someone becomes the oppressor, and someone becomes the slave, right?
Yeah.
That's
the human condition.
Yeah, that is the human condition. So slavery really is indicative of the fallen world, right? I think it's one of the great symbols of the fallen world, that slavery and oppression, like this should even exist. So here is a situation where within the household of God, within the community of faith, there is a slave and there's a master. And it's which is left over from the fallen world, right? Now they've come into God's kingdom, right? And it's not, let's just keep going and we'll bunker down and wait till Jesus comes back and he'll sort things out. No, it fundamentally changes things now. Yeah. It redefines all relationships. And in Galatians, Paul talks about there is neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, slave nor free. So, and it's an interesting statement there, I think, in chapter 3 of Galatians, where he's saying there are now like nationality, class, and gender, like the gospel just flattens all of that. And
it's the embodiment of the the bumper sticker that we see. The ground is level at the foot of the cross.
Yeah, that's right.
And like we go, whatever, we hear it in a song or a T-shirt or whatever. Yeah. We go, no, that's exactly what Paul's saying here.
Yeah.
Philemon, as a slave owner, isn't a couple of steps higher, or in our modern way of thinking, a couple of steps lower because he's a slave owner.
Yeah.
He's level with Onesimus at the foot of the cross.
Yeah, that's right. So there's this revolutionary thing that happens where and you can imagine how difficult this is, because Roman society was a a class society. I mean, intensely so. And here is Paul saying, well, none of that now, that doesn't apply within the Christian community. We are to be completely countercultural. And so he commends Onesimus to Philemon. Now, the Onesimus, the name means useful. Yeah. And he says at one point, he has become useless to you. Yeah. No, you consider him useless. Yeah, he was useless to you because obviously he ran away. But now he's become useful to me and to you.
So let's take a moment, and we're sort of filling in the blanks here. We've got a little bit of tradition, we've got a little bit of interpretation, we've got a little bit of ideas of what's happened. So in this church, probably in Colossae there, we have Philemon, who's obviously a well-to-do believer in there. He owns slaves and things like that. He's
actually it's at his house that the church
is meeting. Yeah. So he has some slaves now. At some point, Onesimus, the slave, the useless, the useless one, does something. Whether he steals money or does something, and that's what a lot of people would say. He's taken something. He's like, "Here's my chance. I'm out of here. Rome, here I come."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he takes off to Rome. Now, at some point, he's either come unstuck, he's run out of money, he's done the prodigal son thing. We don't know exactly, and whether or not. This is the bits that we're sort of adding in together. Did Onesimus know Paul from beforehand? Well, probably. He served Paul in the household, and he's probably sat underneath Paul's teaching. Was he a believer? I think we get the idea that probably not when he took off. Yeah. But now that he's somehow needed some help, or bumped it back into Paul and the gang, he's come back to him, and he's finally sat under the teaching. And now Paul is making it very obvious: this man is saved now. He's one of us. Yeah. He needs to be useful. I love having him here. He's learning and he's teaching. He's been a great help, but I can't just sit on it. This needs to be fixed.
Yeah, this needs to be fixed. I think Paul. Because there's some debate over what is Paul actually asking for here. Yeah. It's a little indirect. Yeah. And it seems like he actually does want Onesimus to come back and help him. He wants Onesimus as a helper. So he's sort of politely and in a veiled way asking Philemon for that,
Basically saying, can he be free?
Yeah.
Can he be a free man?
That's right. So he's asking him to set him free. And Paul even says, whatever cost he's incurred, I will pay that.
Yeah, take it. Yeah, and I love the asterisk there. This is so Paul. We see so much of Paul's clever way of thinking, where he's like, and I don't have to remind you. Yeah. You owe me your life. But hey, I'm not going to mention it.
That's right.
And the way, and I love the other thing. This has really shaped my way as a young man of seeing how, I think sometimes depending on your personality. You left to your devices, especially if you've worked in the church for a while, you begin to think negatively about everybody, or you're hoping for the very least. Yeah. I just want this. Oh, please. Yeah. Paul has this attitude of, I'm aiming for the very best.
Yeah, I'm going to expect a lot from you.
I expect this. And he sort of acts like it's going to happen. Yeah. And I love that. It taught me so much about how...
That's a really good point. Yeah, very good point.
And again, we can get into business-wise and negotiation. Paul's very sharp in these type of things. But just spiritually, how we deal with each other, how we deal with other people. He always expects the very best.
Yeah, and I think this is part of this new community idea. I mean, Paul didn't want to incur any cost for people. He wasn't... He really didn't ask much. I mean, he works for his own living. He advocates the idea that the workers are worthy of their wages, and he encourages churches to support those who work for him. But he says, as for me, I'm not going to receive that. I have a right to that, but I'm not going to receive that. And yet, he also recognises that we can expect things from each other, not in an entitlement sense of being entitled, but this is a new kind of community actually where we should be able to rely on other, and he feels that he can rely on Philemon. Getting to the issue of slavery, I mean, this is an interesting issue because, why didn't Paul just say, slavery is wrong, you should all Christians should release their slaves? Now, that's not going to work. That's not going to work in the ancient world, because where are they going to go? Yeah. I mean, you just said that Philemon escaped, right? That doesn't work out for him, right? No. Because where are you going to go in the ancient world? Onesimus. Sorry.
No, it's easy to do. It's easy to do.
So Onesimus runs away, and as you said, it just doesn't go well for him. So freeing the slaves isn't really going to work. It's that they're part of these household, a household in ancient Rome. Of someone like Philemon is going to involve a number of slaves. Yeah. So this is a classic case of how Jesus changes things. It's not that he doesn't work from the outside, but from the inside. He changes it from the inside. It's like dissolves it. It's like the difference. I'm thinking about this at the moment because I'm for my sermon prep on Sunday, and I'm going to be preaching on Philemon, and I was thinking about a way of illustrating this, and it's a little bit like the difference between saying, like, I'm going to destroy this building. It's like it's either an elephant or an ant. Like, now, an elephant can crush the building, but ants actually can get, like white ants, can get in there and completely dissolve the thing from the inside out. I don't know if anyone's familiar with what white ants can do. It's one of the most remarkable things. Literally can dissolve a building. Yeah. It's just unbelievable. Yeah. And this is the gospel has this inside out kind of effect, this sort of white ant effect, where it goes into situations of oppression and evil, and it's not that systemic change shouldn't happen or institutional change shouldn't happen. But what should happen first really is this inside out kind of change. Yeah. So, the fact is that the gospel caused these two people, slave and master, to completely change the way that they related to each other. So now they're brothers. Now they're equal. Now, what a way to change things from the inside out. Yeah. So that slaves in wealthy households in the early Christian church, they were, and Paul's exhortations to this effect in Ephesians and other letters, were to the effect that they had to treat them like brothers, because when it came to the Lord's Day, they were going to be sitting at the same communion table, of which Jesus says, if you go to the communion table and someone has something against you, sort it out there, right? Yeah. So, so they were to relate to each other. Now that, as brothers, and that is absolutely revolutionary, and that's what comes through this letter of Philemon. So yes, short letter, doesn't seem like there's much going on. I tell you, there's a universe of change going on, and this letter is an indication of that. Yeah,
100%. And and to wrap up the story, you can imagine, Onesimus the slave, having found Christ, been sitting under the teaching of Paul, being, his whole life has changed, and Paul's like, dude, we've got something to solve over here. But here's my plan. This is what I want to see happen. And Onesimus, being a slave, probably couldn't read. He's taking, so he's going back with a letter, type of thing, and he's hoping Paul hasn't, said anything else in there. The fear and the trembling that he's going back to someone that he's wronged, not only someone that he's wronged, someone who's, who's been his master for years, going back and saying, this is me. We can only imagine. We can only imagine the fear in his heart. And we have to imagine, because we don't really know, but we like to think there was a massive happy ending, And that Philemon, of course, took him back, forgave it, and Onesimus went back to be with Paul, hopefully, eventually.
And, it's a lot happier ending than it would have been, because, of course, the punishment for escaped slaves in Rome was crucifixion. Yeah, yeah. So Onesimus is being saved from something very significant. I think even that's very significant.
We're moving on, putting the New Testament behind us, going further back in the time machine.
That's right.
Back about, what are we doing? About 500 years before the writings of Paul that we're reading here, we're going back to the time of Ezra.
That's right. So picking up from the story, and the Thrive Reading Guide works through the Old Testament narratives in order, in historical order. And so we left off in the last Old Testament edition of Thrive. We looked at Ezekiel and Daniel and that period of the exile and everything leading up to there.
Now, for those of coming in fresh who might not be knowing this, and you might be totally new to the Bible, summing up the time of the exile very, very briefly is
okay. So in 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians, and the people were taken into exile. The survivors were taken into exile. There was a couple of other deportations before that. The reason for this was the rebellion, persistent rebellion of God's people. They didn't listen to God. Warning after warning. And so this disaster occurred. It didn't need to be as bad as it was, but they kept resisting the Babylonians to the end. Taken into exile into the area of Babylonia and resettled there. It was prophesied that they would be there 70 years. Now, the first to be taken actually back in 605, when the Babylonians first made an incursion into the area, was Daniel. So from the time of Daniel, when Daniel went into exile, it was actually 70 years from that time. And what an amazing prediction. So the Babylonians, Babylonia was quite an amazing city in the ancient world, thought to be impenetrable, but in the second half of the 6th century BC, so we're talking the 500s, the Persians came to prominence, and particularly Cyrus the Persian, who was a great military strategist, great general. He had conquered enormous territories and now set his sights on Babylon. And he actually managed to take Babylon without a battle in the middle of the night. It's an amazing story, actually, how they diverted the river actually so that they could come under the walls through the riverbank, and they actually broke into Babylon that way on the same night that Belshazzar was having his famous feast. And we read about that in Daniel.
Yeah.
So Belshazzar's having his famous feast, and that was actually while that was happening, the Persian army under Cyrus was breaking into the city. They took the city in the middle of the night without a battle. It was a decisive victory, and Cyrus becomes now the new ruler of pretty much the known world. Yeah. So it's an enormous territory. And his policy is different, actually, to that of the Babylonians. He is a far more lenient leader. His policy, again, is to try to win the hearts and minds of people. So he actually liberates exiled peoples. Yeah. Not just the Jews. On this famous Cyrus cylinder that was discovered in the 19th century. He has this proclamation about his desire to liberate exiled peoples and send them back, to rebuild their temples and to pray for him. Yeah, as their emperor.
Yeah, yeah.
So he does this.
That's a great background to the book of Ezra, and we're coming to now the time of the end of the exiles.
That's right.
Now, again, we need to just reiterate. And Matt, you did an awesome job of giving us all the dates and everything like that. The big spiritual picture here is the chosen people of God, the Israelites.
Yeah.
Rebel, not interested in what God has to say, not listen to the prophets. Yeah. God says, I'm going to put you into exile, but trust me, something's good is going to come out of this. I need to sort of shake you up and bring you back. Yeah. They are in that time of exile. God is doing a work amongst them, but they are heartbroken to be away from their land and all the promises of God. Yeah. They understand what's going on. And now, this time of the exile. Now, during the time of the exile is this whole, I would say, culturally and even theologically and even, what we see today, the idea of a Jewish man is born, like the idea of Judaism and Jewishness is really created in this time of them being away from their land. They have to sort of reinvent themselves as people. Yeah. And now this time that Ezra comes along, and the time to go back is said to the king. We see Ezra's heart in this. In Ezra 9, he says, this is the words of Ezra. He says, "For we are slaves, yet in our bondage our God has not forsaken us, but has extended loving kindness to us in the sight of the kings of Persia, to give us reviving, to raise up the house of our God, and to restore its ruins, and to give us a wall in Judah and Jerusalem."
Yeah, that's right. It's a wonderful story because the exile kind of it was like being shut out from God's presence. Now, God was very much there, but it had this. It was almost like a metaphor, like you have refused to listen to me. So I'm sending you away, as it were, from the symbol of my presence, which was the temple. The temple was the symbol of God's favorable presence among his people. Well, the temple was destroyed and they're sent into exile. Yeah. And of course, Psalm 137, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept when we remembered Zion." It was a time of great anguish. They're captives in a foreign land. But it's during this time that they started to ask the right questions. They sought God again. They not everyone, but there was a faithful, there was a faithful community, a Jewish community, who actually put together the books of Joshua right through to the book of Kings that were actually put together in the exile, and so there's this thriving community. They experienced something of a revival, really. I mean, the preaching of Ezekiel and Daniel wasn't all in vain. It was that there was a faithful remnant, as it's called. So these people settled down. They had livelihoods. I mean, 70 years is a long time.
Yeah. It's generations.
Yeah, that's right. So there was a whole generation that had never even were born in exile and grew up in exile, and that was home for them. So it was a big thing when Cyrus issued this decree and said, "I'm letting all foreign peoples go home." There were lots that didn't, actually.
And we're going to look into that as well, of what happens to those who remain.
Yeah, that's right.
In the book of Esther.
That's right. So there were lots that didn't, but there were about 40,000 who ended up in different shifts going back to Jerusalem. And the book of Ezra is about the return. Yeah. It begins with a proclamation of Cyrus. You're free to go. For them, it was remarkable because it's exactly what was prophesied. Even the time period was exactly what was prophesied. They are free to go home, and they go home to be a part of this new age that God is bringing about. All of the things that Ezekiel and Daniel have talked about, they're going back. They want to be a part of this, and that's what they're going back for.
Now, that's a great overview, and just a little touch on the man Ezra himself.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's thought that not only did he write the book of Ezra, he was also helping Nehemiah write. They were originally one book. Ezra and Nehemiah in the Jewish Bible are sort of one book. Traditionally, he's the compiler. Yeah. Of much of what we think of the Old Testament is, as in the time of the kings and everything like that. He's putting all that to get that together. So Ezra really is, outside of Moses writing the 5 books of the law, Ezra is a massive part of what we think of the Old Testament. Yeah, it was right. through his vision and through his focus that only was able to be there because of this time of exile. He'd been like one of these purified new type of Jewish people to come out of this time of exile and say, "People, we've seen what happens when we don't obey. We need to be reminded of this and look at these stories."
That's right. He's a man of the word, and this is the big problem, because they didn't listen to God, and so during the time of the exile, you get this faithful remnant that rally around, the prophecies of the Torah, the books of Moses, as well as the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah. And they've and they also actually put together the sacred history from Joshua through to end of 2 Kings. And yes, Ezra may well have been involved in that. He was a scribe, so a scribe was someone who copied out the scriptures and was responsible for seeing it passed on and implemented. And this is exactly what we see in the book of Ezra. So they go back to the land, but Ezra's message is really about first things being first.
Yeah.
you're going back, you're stepping into God's purpose, but to do that, you've got to focus on God's purpose and God's word, and Ezra ensures that that's the case.
If we, and I love trying to do this, and we'll wrap up the episode with this. If we try to wrap it back up into what we originally were talking about at the beginning of this episode about Titus, and Titus being really like Paul giving Titus instruction about out of good doctrine, your life will be good. Like, this is it. Yeah. It's all, you can see the roots of that here with what Ezra is pleading with the people.
Absolutely. That's a good connection, because they are going back, and they are meant to live completely different sorts of lives. I mean, the whole problem before the exile was that they were just like all of the other nations. So Ezra wants to ensure that they live the distinct lives that they're called to live as they anticipate the coming of the Messiah. And this, I think, is a message that's just so poignant for us, that we are called to a completely different kind of life. And the themes that come out of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah underscore that beautifully.
So there you have it. Episode 22, the bonus extra double down. I don't know what we're going to come up and call this one. Now, this is only relevant for those of you who are listening live as we put them out. I know there'll be people listening in the far-flung future as you just go through all the episodes, and welcome to you as well. So good to have everybody listening, and thank you for sharing these podcasts with your friends. If you want to help us, the best way that you can help us is just recommend this podcast to a friend, just one friend. Pop it on social media, tell someone about it, play it for someone, and get them involved as well. That goes such a long way for us in the work that we're doing here. All right, we'll be back on Friday with your regularly scheduled program, episode 23, as we move into Ezra. It'll be great to be back into our schedule, but thank you so much for all the support, all the kind words that you say. Make sure you listen to what the wonderful voiceover lady Benita says here at the end, and visit us online, because we would love to hear from you. All right, until next time, bye.
Our music is provided by the talented Rod Gear. For more information, head to rodgearmusic.com. The podcast is recorded at the studios of Geelong Christian Media Incorporated, then edited and produced by DJP.fm. Join the conversation online with nearly 400 other listeners at facebook.com/groups/thrivedeeper. /thrive deeper. /thrive deeper. /thrive deeper. /thrive deeper. /thrive deeper. /thrive deeper.
You've so discombobulated with all of the travelling that you've done and everything that you've got on. I'm taking advantage of that and saying, yeah, it's time to record again.
I never liked the word bonus. There's something cheap about it. Oh. That was a bonus.
A bonus phone call.
Bonus phone call from the manager.
No, take it. I'll pause it. You take it. He's going to say, what are you doing?
Hey, Stu, how you going? That's all right. No, we're actually doing the podcast at the moment. We paused it because my phone rang and
it rang during the...
You might as well just take it.
You know, this is going to be the hidden blooper at the end of the podcast now, Stu.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. I'll do that. No worries at all. That's all good. Okay, cheers. He's gone.
He's out of there. That's okay.
Okay, sorry.
That's a classic. That's the third member of the team, Mr. Stuart Duncan, calling in. Yeah. He will never ever want to jump on the microphone here at all. No. That's as much as you're ever going to hear from him. So we need to come up with another word for bonus. It's just an extra. It's just a double down. I don't know what it is.